Myst, Might, Mayhem. By Han Jung-Wioya. Chapter 443. Wicked Heart Granny. Part 4. It was a sensation closer to instinct than reason. He was capable of colder and more rational judgment than anyone else, as he was nearly emotionless compared to ordinary humans. For the first time in his life, he had come to like someone, and the sense of loss from that person's annihilation aroused great anger in him. Usually, we say that we are swept away by anger. However, for Mok Jae-eun, anger brought about a single-minded focus. It was a single will to desperately kill someone, and because of it, all other unnecessary calculations and thoughts disappeared. Swish. Clash, clash, clash. The idea of deflecting true chi with true chi. And the bold gamble of deflecting the power of a strike, concentrating all power into one point through the subtlety of the scripture of transferring true chi while adding his own power. Crack. This placed a tremendous overload on his body. However, Mok Jae-eun instinctively found the most effective way to unleash this power. It was the chasing whirlwind sword, one of the ultimate techniques of Six Offices Commander So Yin. Bang! A foot stomp that crushed the ground. Along with it, the sword energy of two powers rotating in a spiral. Crack! With the sound of space tearing, the sword energy imbued with two powers created a whirlwind like a storm. Swish, 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 swish. By rotating the powers that didn't mix and could strain the body in a spiral, he made them naturally combine without forcibly mixing them into one. Thus, the whirlwind created by the two powers caused a massive sword energy storm that enveloped Wicked Granny. Boom, 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 boom. As even the air was torn apart, dozens of Jang were instantly devastated, and within its center, another strange event was unfolding. Whoosh! Within the storm of sword energy, two formless claws overlapped as if interlocking, wrapping around someone, none other than Wicked Granny. She thought this was the best way to block it since she couldn't avoid it, but that wasn't all. In that state, Wicked Granny inside the two formless claws began to rotate fiercely in the opposite spiral direction. Clash, 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 clash. Because of this, as the spiral and counter-spiral overlapped, swish. The whirlwind combining the two powers gradually subsided. And finally, the momentum completely dissipated. Thud. Wicked Granny, who had blocked this with an exquisite move, staggered and then coughed up black blood. No matter how much she surpassed Mok Jae-eun in internal energy or power, it was difficult to completely withstand the spiral sword technique that combined her own power concentrated into a single point with Mok Jae-eun's sword energy. After staggering 2 steps, she regained her balance and wiped the blood with her sleeve. Hew. Hew. Her pupils shook as she steadied her breathing. This wasn't because of Mok Jae-eun's innate combat sense and response. It was because of the sword technique Mok Jae-eun had just demonstrated. Without a doubt. This was that person's sword technique. Was this the reason for the scent of the old days emanating from this fellow? She raised her head and looked at Mok Jae-eun. Sizzle. Sizzle. Mok Jae-eun was standing with his formless sword extended, but his arm was trembling, and blood was spurting from some acupoints that couldn't withstand the strain. Although reaching the realm of life and death meant that the subtlety of concentrating power was no longer a technique beyond his limits, it was inevitably straining to also imbue the opponent's power. My right arm won't move. But it didn't matter. He needed to expel the overloaded energy tormenting his body and move other body parts. He expanded his senses by focusing on each part again, starting from the tips of his toes. This incredible concentration of Mok Jae-eun quickly regained control over his body that wasn't moving due to trembling from overload. A sensation returned to his entire body. Whoosh! Mok Jae-eun immediately flew towards Wicked Granny. Tap tap. As he flew after kicking off the ground twice, Mok Jae-eun's figure split into 3. It was the subtlety of creating clones from the wind god's step he had stolen and learned from the masked Ma'are Hyan. Seeing Mok Jae-eun's figure split into 3 along with the rushing wind, Wicked Granny raised the corner of her mouth. It's certain. The man before her eyes had clearly inherited that person's legacy. If so. Thud. Wicked Granny immediately knelt on one knee, clasped her hands in a salute, and cried out. Wicked Granny Cheol Surayan pays respects to the blood descendant who inherited that person's legacy. A glint flashed in Mok Jayangun's eyes for an instant at her sudden action. But that was the end of it. He didn't know why she was reacting like this, but it didn't matter whether it was a misunderstanding or anything else. The original purpose of coming here was just one thing. It was to retrieve the forbidden technique that could unite souls and help Chong Ryong. But at the point where she had been annihilated, all of that became meaningless, so Mok Jayangun had only one thought: to kill Wicked Granny. Flinch. Wicked Granny furrowed her brow as Mok Jayangun didn't stop his attack despite her paying respects, and she tried to create distance by employing her lightness technique. Why? If he was that person's blood relative, he should know her. But why isn't he withdrawing his killing intent and attacking like this? Whoosh. As she wondered, she immediately summoned 3 formless claws to block the sword techniques unleashed by Mok Jayangun's figures flying in from 3 directions. Clash, 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 clash. Boom, 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 boom. Each move, with power concentrated into it, caused tremendous repercussions every time they clashed. The meadow around where they were fighting had already lost its shape and was becoming devastated. Wicked Granny, blocking Mok Jayangun's attacks, shouted, "Please stop. I am not your enemy." Despite her cry, Mok Jayangun had no intention of stopping. Rather, he was pressuring her with increasingly sharp and precise sword techniques. This couldn't help but inwardly surprise Wicked Granny as well. Even though I'm focusing on defense, his sword techniques are becoming increasingly precise. Truly monstrous talent. It was talent that couldn't be measured by simply calling it exceptional. Given enough time, he was the kind of talent that could even surpass the experience she had accumulated. However, this was no time to be surprised. Clash, 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 clash. Wicked Granny, blocking Mok Jayangun's formless sword, shouted, "I serve your ancestor. There's no reason to fight any." Nonsense. Swish. Wicked Granny hurriedly tilted her head to the side, but her cheek was cut and she ended up bleeding. Her gaze sharpened. The sword techniques were becoming increasingly precise, surpassing a level that could be blocked by defense alone. It was an unbelievably rapid rate of improvement. This won't do. It seemed she needed to mix offense and defense appropriately. It was truly perplexing. She kept talking about her relationship with that person, but why was he attacking her so fiercely as if to kill her? Could it be that he really doesn't know anything? Her expression became subtle. Among those who had intruded here, there were occasionally some who said that everything in the old martial arts world had disappeared after the Day of the Great Calamity, but even so, it was a place that once dominated the martial arts world. How could a place once called the greatest under heaven easily disappear? Clash, 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 clash. As she blocked Mok Jayangun's full power sword techniques, she thought she needed to change her approach. He kept trying to kill her with tremendous killing intent, so it seemed better to subdue him first and then attempt conversation. So she stopped just defending and gathered her power to launch a strike with her formless claw towards Mok Jayangun's chest. But at that moment, swish! The formless sword, which had been evenly matched until now because they were in the same realm, pierced through and partially cut the formless claw. Her pupils shook for a moment. He cut the formless claw? Wicked Granny couldn't hide her bewilderment. Of course, even formless energy can be superior depending on one's power. However, because this was basically a realm of enlightenment possible only after reaching the extreme, it was difficult to break with the same formless energy. But now, Mok Jayangun had cut through the formless claw, though not completely. Tremble! What on earth was this? Wicked Granny hurriedly tried to create distance due to the aftermath of the sharp energy penetrating as the formless claw was cut. She could instinctively understand. Beyond becoming more precise, the sword was gradually becoming sharper. What this meant was one thing. He's moving towards a higher realm in the midst of our confrontation. She truly couldn't hide her surprise. Killing intent. The single-minded focus to kill someone was a path that moved away from principle and the way, so it couldn't lead to entering a higher realm. This was something one could know through long years of mental and physical cultivation. But why was this person's sword continually becoming stronger the more they clashed? Clash. As the formless sword and formless claw collided, their figures crossed for an instant. Swish. The formless claw was split even more than before, and Wicked Granny's left shoulder became soaked in blood from a sword wound. Her gaze narrowed as she looked at Mok Jiangun. Single-minded focus. She could now understand the reason. Although it was killing intent, this was pure single-minded focus. Due to the single-minded focus of only wanting to kill her, the sword was becoming closer to its inherent role, to the point of purity. Throb. She felt pain from the blade energy penetrating her shoulder. Feeling pain after such a long time, any thoughts about this being before her being someone's descendant or anything like that completely disappeared from her mind. A strengthening opponent, a worthy adversary met after a long time. All of this gradually increased her competitive spirit and fighting spirit even more. Since it had come to this, she wanted to properly fight with full power, throwing away all the karma she had accumulated and the shackles towards that person. Grr. As she fully unleashed her true chi, strong wind pressure swept around her due to her energy. Having lived for many years, she far surpassed Mok Jiangun in pure internal energy. Even Mok Jiangun, who had been focusing only on the single-minded thought of killing her, seemed to judge that everything would be decided in a single move given her changed energy, and he properly took his stance. Swish. It was the moment when these two peerless masters were about to compete with their ultimate techniques. Whoosh. At that moment, someone entered through the distorted gap in the formation torn by Mok Jiangun's formless sword. Then that someone hurriedly shouted, "Stop!" Despite the ear-splitting shout, neither Mok Jiangun nor Wicked Granny took their eyes off each other at all. It was a crucial moment. The match would be decided the instant one took their eyes off the opponent. Seeing this, the person who had shouted at them, thinking this wouldn't do, this time flew between them, squeezing in. She was. "So you're in?" It was 6 Office's commander. "So you're in." However, Wicked Granny, who had no idea who she was, had already made up her mind to settle the match and urged, "Don't interfere, woman." "I can't do that, Wicked Granny Chiol Surayan." When she accurately stated her title and name despite seeing her for the first time, one of Wicked Granny's eyebrows raised. "You? Who are you?" At this question, a chilling, ominous energy surged from 6 Office's commander. "So you're in." Along with this, her black hair turned blood red. Wicked Granny's eyes widened as she watched this. To her, 6 Office's commander. "So you're in," whose hair had completely turned the color of blood, clasped her hands in a salute and said, "Jin Yurin, daughter of Jin Yangin, the last young sect leader of Mushong Fortress, pays respects to Master Chiol Surayan, who served that person." Chapter 444. Wicked Heart Granny. Part 5. Just half a quarter hour earlier. When 6 Office's commander So Yurin arrived near the bamboo forest, a fierce battle was already underway. The situation was a clash between those trying to prevent entry into the bamboo forest and those attempting to break through. However, one side numbered in the hundreds while the other was just a small group. Yet the smaller group consisted entirely of extraordinary masters who had surpassed the peak realm, so the battle was somewhat evenly matched. Am I too late? Watching their conflict, she couldn't understand what was going on. She had hurried here as fast as she could, but had the secret society been even faster than her? Just then, her eyes caught sight of someone. It was the masked Ma-Are Hyan, who had assisted her in the embroidered uniform guards. Ma-Are Hyan, 6 Office's commander. He too spotted her and called out. At this, she instantly swept away the enemies rushing towards Ma-Are Hyan with the Force Shadow Fist and Kick, one of the ultimate techniques of the Wind Shadow 8 forms. Thud 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 thud. Gah. Ugh. After instantly defeating over 10 peak masters with her ultimate technique, she immediately asked Ma-Are Hyen, "Has Master Dambekha arrived already?" She had asked Dambekha, the blood saint of the Nine Blood sect, to deliver the information she had discovered to Mok Jiangun. However, unlike herself who had headed straight for the bamboo forest, she had predicted it would naturally take some time for Dambekha to receive that information. But seeing Ma-Are Hyen and familiar faces like Sib Chun and Mong Muyak, it clearly meant that Mok Jiangun had also arrived here. Yet. Master Dambekha? What do you mean? Didn't you receive my message from Master Dambekha? At her words, Ma-Are Hyen replied with a puzzled expression. No, that's not it. We came here with our lord to prevent that dangerous forbidden technique from falling into the hands of the secret society. Ah. At his answer, So Yurin nodded as if relieved and was inwardly surprised. It seemed Mok Jiangun had already discovered the information she had obtained and had even moved first. If they hadn't arrived first, that important forbidden technique might have fallen into their hands. In any case, the issue now wasn't who arrived first. That mustn't fall into their hands. So she scanned the surroundings and asked, "Where is young Master Mok?" He entered the bamboo forest to stop an enemy who had gone in ahead. There was someone who entered first? Yes. Judging by how much quieter the bamboo forest has become compared to earlier, our lord may have subdued that person. Oh no. At that moment, Ma-Are Hyen spotted masked individuals from the secret society breaking through their defense line and rushing towards the bamboo forest. As he was about to move, 6 Office's commander So Yurin held out her hand telling him not to intervene and flew off. Whoosh. I'll take care of them, you protect this place. Understood. Although Mok Jiangun's forces overwhelmed in terms of skill, there were so many enemies that they couldn't prevent some from breaking through in time. However, Ma-Are Hyen thought it fortunate. The best ally had arrived at the perfect moment. So Yurin, who had flown off, created clones with her wind shadow step and instantly caught up with those using lightness techniques to rush towards the bamboo forest, subduing them. Swish. Swish. Swish 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 swish. It took her only the time to count to 3 to subdue 5 masked individuals. After swiftly subduing them, she was about to help Ma-Are Hyen and the others again when she turned her ear to the sounds coming from inside the bamboo forest. Clang. Clang. The sounds of fighting could be heard from inside. Keek keek. Kag. Kag. That is? At this, she entered the bamboo forest and discovered a swordsman fighting against grotesque spiritual beasts. It was none other than the Ghost Blade. The Ghost Blade, who had tried to enter through the distorted space gap following Mok Jiangun, was blocking the spiritual beasts that were springing out from the hole created by Destruction Emperor. Seeing the Ghost Blade for the first time, So Yurin couldn't help but be inwardly surprised. This was because, despite seeming injured, he was easily handling quite strong-looking spiritual beasts alone with remarkable swordsmanship. His flower grafting has reached the extreme. Flower grafting is a technique for facing strong enemies with little strength. The Ghost Blade was demonstrating high-level subtleties, such as deflecting even the grotesque attacks of non-human spiritual beasts with his sword to attack other spiritual beasts. However, the spiritual beasts were no ordinary foes, and as they kept coming up through the hole, it seemed too much for him to block alone. So she flew towards them to attack the spiritual beasts and help him. I'll help too. Whoosh. Then. Hugh. Hugh. I don't know who you are, but if you serve him, help the one who went inside. The Ghost Blade rejected this and pointed at the distorted space gap with his left hand. At his words, 6 Office's commander So Yurin thought, one who serves him? What on earth did that mean? Had he mistaken her for one of Mok Jiangun's subordinates? Rather, she had thought he was an acquaintance of Mok Jiangun or someone related to him. As she wondered, the Ghost Blade shouted at her. The highest executive of the secret society is inside. If the forbidden technique falls into his hands, everything is over. The secret society? So they hadn't completely blocked them? At the ghost blade's cry, So Yuren finally changed direction and flew into the distorted space gap. The first thing that caught Six Office's commander So Yuren's eye upon entering was none other than the devastated meadow and an unconscious man wearing white scale armor. However, her gaze didn't linger on him for long. This was because of two peerless masters facing off with an extraordinary aura. Is this possible? Seeing this, she couldn't help but be inwardly astonished. This was because the aura emanating from them was so tremendous that it surpassed even Gu Songbek, the Northern Blade King and also Southern Pacification Commissioner, one of the 6 heavens, no, 7 heavens, called the pinnacle of the current martial arts world. She truly couldn't help but be surprised. Is that really young Master Mok? She knew better than anyone that he possessed monstrous talent, having faced him directly. But this was hard to believe. It had barely been 2 months since they parted at the Imperial Palace. Although she too had developed her martial arts further in the meantime, gaining enlightenment through her confrontation with the Northern Blade King, this was truly astonishing. What Mok Jiangun held in his hand was undoubtedly a formless sword, said to be possible only after reaching the pinnacle of swordsmanship. That meant, has he surpassed the wall of walls? He was truly a monster who had transcended human limits. How could such a monster exist? After being at a loss for words for a moment, she then looked at the opponent facing off against Mok Jiangun. While Mok Jiangun's rapid increase in power was remarkable, that woman was no pushover either. She looked to be barely in her early 20s on the outside, but how had she reached such a level of martial arts? Looking at them, the titles for the pinnacle of the current martial arts world would have to change. But Six Office's commander So Yuren's eyes widened as she looked at the woman facing off against Mok Jiangun. No way? She remembered a story her father, Jin Yongin, had told her long ago. He had told her anecdotes of their ancestors as if telling old folk tales, and there were people who appeared in those legends. Her father had described their appearances in detail. So she remembered exactly. It can't be. Has she been alive all this time? She was so surprised that she covered her mouth with her palm. It was hard to believe, but she soon came to her senses. Thinking about it, even the elder and Dam Bekha of the Nine Blood sect had lived this long, so there was no reason she couldn't either. Moreover, wasn't she the person who had lived the longest even in those days? So she thought she couldn't just stand by. I must stop their fight. Whoosh! So Yuren flew towards them as they faced off and shouted, "Stop!" Despite her ear-splitting cry, neither Mok Jiangun nor Wicked Granny took their eyes off each other at all. Thinking this wouldn't do, she flew between them, squeezing in. Wicked Granny urged her. "Don't interfere, woman." "I can't do that, Wicked Granny Cheol Surayan." "You? Who are you?" At this question, Six Office's commander So Yuren employed the grand blood expansive all-overseeing heaven's art. Grr. Then her black hair turned blood red. Wicked Granny's eyes widened as she watched this. To her, Six Office's commander So Yuren, whose hair had completely turned the color of blood, clasped her hands in a salute and said, "Jin Yuren, daughter of Jin Yongin, the last young sect leader of Mushong Fortress, pays respects to Master Cheol Surayan, who served that person." In an instant, Wicked Granny's expression, which had been at the peak of fighting spirit, completely softened. This woman before her eyes was that person's blood descendant? Just looking at her blood-red hair, she was undeniably that person's blood relative. Then who was the one facing off against her? She had naturally assumed he was a blood descendant because he could use the luminous star sword art, one of that person's ultimate techniques, and the lightness technique of the wind shadow 8 forms. As if reading her thoughts, So Yuren, no, Jin Yuren turned her head and said to Mok Jiangun, "Young Master Mok. This person is not an enemy. Please stop." And Master Cheol Surayan. "Young Master Mok here is not unrelated to our Jin family. He is the four." Shiver. Before she could finish speaking, Jin Yuren had naturally thought they would stop fighting once she informed them they were allies. But something completely unexpected happened. Mok Jiangun moved with tremendous killing intent. Young Master Mo. Thud. Ah. As Mok Jayangan waved his hand, Jin Yuren's body was flung to the side by a ferocious energy. Along with this, Mok Jayangan's figure blurred and became a black line that cut through the air. Oh no! At this, Wicked Granny, whose fighting spirit had subsided due to Jin Yuren's appearance, hurriedly tried to grab the single strike, concentrating all power into one point with her two hands wrapped in formless claws. Unlike the early stages of their confrontation, she thought she couldn't just block Mok Jayangan's sword that had become even sharper. She had to use all her strength to block it. Clash, 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 clash. The moment the two hands wrapped in formless claws and the formless sword collided, blue flames burst out in all directions along with a flash of light, and the ground cracked and caved in from the aftermath. Rumble. Tremble. Wicked Granny's two hands and arms shook violently. Her expression contorted. Although her fighting spirit had subsided, this single strike was distinctly different from all the power until now. The sword contained only a persistent single-minded focus to kill her and... Creep. What is this? The formless sword was becoming tinged with a ferocious black energy, and thud. Thud. HNNGH. Gradually, her figure began to be pushed back. Moreover, crack. Cracks were also forming near the palms of the two formless claws gripping the formless sword. Because of this, she could understand. It wasn't a matter of fighting spirit. At this moment, this man was overwhelming her. If she let go of her hands and was pushed back further, she would be cut in half like this. Gore. As her life was in danger, she gathered all her true chi into her two hands, beyond her limits. Her formless claws also became tinged with an even whiter light. Meanwhile, someone approached, barely breaking through this tremendous aftermath, and shouted. Whoosh! Young Master Mok. Stop. Even though she was protecting her body with blood-red strong energy, she was having difficulty even breathing due to the tremendous aftermath. At this, Wicked Granny, seeming worried about her, spoke with difficulty. Why, are you doing this? If you have a connection with the Jin family's blood relative, there's no reason to fight like this, risking your life. This is retribution for annihilating her. Her? What? Suddenly, Wicked Granny's expression contorted. She wondered who her could be, but because of the word annihilation, she thought of something. Wicked Granny asked, hoping it wasn't true. Wait. You don't mean that vengeful spirit? Your life is the price. Huh? Wicked Granny was genuinely dumbfounded. Was he really trying to kill her like this because of one vengeful spirit? What on earth was she that he would do this? How could a mere soul filled with resentment cause such anger and killing intent? It made no sense at all, but she soon revealed the truth. She wasn't annihilated. What? That vengeful spirit, woman, is trapped in that thatched house over there. No sooner had those words finished. Whoosh! Huh? Mok Jayangan, who had been pressing in with his sword as if to kill, suddenly withdrew his strength and deflected it. Because of this, Wicked Granny, who had been holding the formless sword, couldn't withstand the force and fell forward. Boom! As she fell forward and couldn't withdraw her strength, the ground touched by the formless claws shattered and caved in. Regardless, Mok Jayangan was flying towards the thatched house. Watching his retreating figure, even Jin Yuren stared blankly, not understanding what was happening. His expression? It changed suddenly. That cold and indifferent face that had been full of terrible killing intent just moments ago brightened in an instant. Chapter 445. Wicked Heart Granny. Part 6. Huh. Huh. Chongrayong's spirit body trapped in the Silverwood prison was incredibly faint. She was already weakened due to the talisman formation and silver wood, but after using the void stabilizing breath, which consumed the most energy among the subtleties of the 8 thought-shattering techniques, she had reached a dangerous state. She tried to endure with all her might, but even her consciousness was gradually becoming hazy. Mortal. I wonder if Mortal is alright. Though she was on the verge of annihilation trying to save him, she didn't regret it. Even if she couldn't achieve her revenge, if she could save Mortal at this moment, she would be satisfied with that. That was her honest feeling. There was just one thing she regretted. It's a shame that I can't see you before I go. Beyond death, complete annihilation. The demise of a being without an afterlife, that's what she regretted so much. As she grew faint, it became difficult even to keep her eyes open, and her eyelids began to close slowly. It was at that moment. Bang! The door shattered and someone entered the thatched house. As she looked towards it with half-closed eyes. Chang Ryong. The voice she had longed to hear so much reached her ears. Her eyes, which had been about to disappear after consuming all her spirit energy, suddenly widened. Mok Jiangun, who approached where she was, ruthlessly tore off the talismans on the floor and then, crack. He shattered even the silver wood with his bare hands. The moment the talismans and silver wood were all broken, as the connection with the outside energy was fully restored, her body that had shrunk instantly returned to its original size. Swish swish swish. However, even though her size returned to normal, Chang Ryong's spirit body was still incredibly faint due to the significant damage to her spirit energy. Seeing Mok Jiangun, Chang Ryong's eyes reddened and she barely held back the tears that were about to pour out. You. How did you? She had tried to detach him from her karma in every way possible. She didn't want him to be hurt and suffer because of her, who would ultimately be annihilated no matter what. That's why she had tried to shoulder everything herself somehow. But why was he still trying to approach her like this to the very end? Thud. At that moment, Mok Jiangun grabbed both of Chang Ryong's shoulders, and she could see the relief on his face. Seeing Mok Jiangun looking at her affectionately with a brightened face, Chang Ryong finally burst into tears. Sob. Mok Jiangun hugged her tightly. Overwhelmed with emotion, she cried as she spoke to Mok Jiangun. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I should stay away, but the moment I see you, I hate myself for being so happy and relieved. It's okay. Everything's okay. Mok Jiangun comforted her, stroking her head while holding her. In his embrace, she couldn't stop her tears and continued to cry pitifully. Although she thought she was prepared to shoulder everything, the moment she saw Mok Jiangun, it was difficult to control the emotions welling up from within. To her like this, Mok Jiangun said, You told me to trust someone else. Now you trust me too. I'll protect you. So don't ever leave my side. Swish. At these words from Mok Jiangun, Chang Ryong, who had been crying, embraced his body with both arms. She could no longer deny it. That the part he occupied within her had grown too large. Master Chiol Surayan. I've shown an unsightly appearance. To that person's blood relative. Wicked Granny clicked her tongue, looking at her hands covered in wounds. If Mok Jiangun hadn't deflected his power and stopped midway, her body might have really been cut in two. At this, she felt a thrill rather than anger. She had naturally thought that the greatest martial arts talent she had seen so far was that person. But this was truly indescribable. He was simply a monster incarnate. There were plenty of people who grew stronger while fighting, but that usually happened at more basic stages. He was reaching for an even higher dimension of swordsmanship at this level of realm. A sword that surpasses the pinnacle of swordsmanship. What should I call this? It was a sword that seemed to approach the very essence of swordsmanship. He stopped midway, but if he had completed this single strike full of killing intense single-minded focus, he would truly surpass the pinnacle of swordsmanship. Perhaps there would be nothing that sword couldn't cut. As she kept marveling, Jin Yuran asked her, Are you all right? Yes, I'm fine. Such wounds will heal quickly. As she said, the blood flowing from her torn palms was gradually stopping. Wicked Granny Chiol Surayan showed this and then asked, But who exactly is that fellow? He's someone who received teachings from Master Moon Evil Sword, 1. Moon Evil Sword? Huh? She wore an expression of disbelief. So this was why each of his sword techniques had felt somehow familiar. Wicked Granny Cheol Surayan clicked her tongue and said, "That old, no, I didn't know Moon Evil Sword was still alive. When that person invited him to come along, he said he would live according to the natural order and whatnot." I apologize. Thinking about it, if Jean Yurin was that person's blood relative, she wasn't unrelated to Moon Evil Sword. He was that person's father-in-law, after all. Feeling like she had made a slip of the tongue, Cheol Surayan apologized. No. It's alright. Jean Yurin shook her head at this. She had heard from her father that wicked Granny Cheol Surayan had lived even longer than the elder. But that wasn't important right now. More importantly, I apologize for being discourteous as soon as we met, Master Cheol Surayan. Thud. Jean Yurin clasped her hands in a salute to her. At this, wicked Granny Cheol Surayan waved her hands, trying to undo her salute. No, you don't need to mind such things. I am that person's faithful servant. You, being that person's blood relative, don't need to show such a gesture. No. Even if you served that person, what I'm about to say will be disrespectful to you, Master Cheol Surayan. Disrespectful? Thud. Jean Yurin knelt on both knees on the ground, not satisfied with just a salute. No, what are you doing? Please get up quickly. No. I can't do that. At this, a flustered Cheol Surayan tried to make her stand up, but she was immovable. How can you do this? If you do this, I won't be able to face that person. Please stand up. I can't until Master Cheol Surayan agrees to help. What? At her words asking for help, Cheol Surayan furrowed her brow. She had guessed there was some reason they had come to this hidden place, but she didn't expect such an earnest attitude. Young miss. My father, the last young sect leader, along with Mushong Fortress, the blood sect, even numerous martial arts sects were annihilated and sacrificed on the day of the Great Calamity. At these words from Jean Yurin, Cheol Surayan's expression froze. She had heard about the day of the Great Calamity from those who had intruded here. They had said that the level of the martial arts world had greatly declined since then. However, she never imagined this story would include Mushong Fortress and the Blood Sect. Even if they weren't as great as during that person's time, she thought Mushong Fortress and the Blood Sect would still be solid due to the descendants who had continued the lineage. Cheol Surayan then looked up at the sky, which had cracks due to the damaged formation. Has that person's concern become reality? That person had said, everything that exists will decay, and that would be no different for Mushong Fortress or the Blood Sect. Had it really come to pass? Even though it had been a long time since that person left, it was truly hard to believe. To her, who was feeling bitter, Jean Yurin continued speaking in an earnest voice. On the day of the Great Calamity, numerous spiritual beasts and even spirit beasts went berserk and tried to destroy the human world. At that time, many heroes of the Central Plains, including my grandfather, came forward and sacrificed themselves to stop it. However, this was not a natural occurrence. My father, the last young sect leader, discovered that it was caused by certain individuals. That organization is still intact and again. Swish. At that moment, before she could finish speaking, Cheol Surayan raised her hand. Jean Yurin looked at her puzzled by her incomprehensible attitude. Then Cheol Surayan, thud, knelt on both knees like her, clasped her hands in a salute, and opened her mouth. I apologize. I understand what you want to ask, young miss, but I cannot leave this place. What? Jean Yurin, who hadn't yet made any request, couldn't hide her bewilderment. She had thought that if this woman, who had achieved great fame even in the old martial arts world and possessed martial arts surpassing the seven heavens called the pinnacle of the current martial arts world, helped them, they could more easily eliminate the enemies behind the scenes. But to be rejected before even making the request, she couldn't help but feel deflated. Moreover, wasn't she that person's loyal servant? How could she reject so coldly without even listening to everything? Master Chiol Surayan. I have already received punishment from that person to guard this place and cleanse my karma. Cleanse your karma? Although all martial artists accumulate much karma, I killed numerous innocent women and children to save my blind eyes and this womb. At wicked Granny Chiol Surayan's words, spoken calmly as if confessing, Jean Yurin was momentarily at a loss for words. Although she had heard old stories from her father, she didn't properly know the specific reasons why she was called a great villain. However, unexpectedly, the karma she bore was incomparably stronger than ordinary people. Seeing her surprised look, Chiol Surayan spoke in a bitter voice. I was accumulating merit to cleanse my karma here, and I swore to that person on my life that no matter what happened, I would not leave this place. A sigh escaped Jean Yurin's lips. She had thought this was an opportunity to gain not only the forbidden technique but also the best ally. But that expectation was crumbling so hopelessly. Then wicked Granny Chiol Surayan said to her, who couldn't hide her disappointment. However, the reason that person left me here was not just to cleanse my karma. What do you mean? Please follow me. Wicked Granny Chiol Surayan stood up and guided her towards the thatched house. As they entered the thatched house, Mok Jayanan was there alone. At this, Chiol Surayan looked at the broken silver wood bars with wary eyes. Could it be that the vengeful spirit couldn't endure in the end and was annihilated? If that was the case, she might have to fight this man again. But then, do you know about the forbidden technique? Mok Jayanan wasn't angry at all. Rather, he was extremely calm. Puzzled by this, Chiol Surayan asked, hoping it might be the case. Where did that vengeful spirit go? That's none of your business, old monster. You. For a moment her voice almost rose, but Chiol Surayan soon calmed her anger. There was no point in fighting this guy again, she would only be at a disadvantage. From the moment she took the vow not to kill, those with equal or greater power than her became enemies she couldn't face. Did you really defeat that old monster? Chong Ryong's voice reached Mok Jayanan's ears. Chong Ryong, whose spirit body had been damaged to the brink of annihilation while trapped in the silver wood, had voluntarily entered the wooden puppet to recover her spirit energy. Chong Ryong couldn't hide her surprise seeing wicked Granny somewhat overwhelmed in aura. To think she could do this even to a great villain of the old martial arts world, she wondered where the limit of this mortal fellow was. Meanwhile, Jean Yurin, who was behind them, sighed and said, Young Master Mok. I don't know what happened, but if the misunderstanding is cleared up, please stop now. At her words, Mok Jayanan lightly shrugged his shoulders. Then Chiol Surayan glared at Mok Jayanan with a displeased expression, then brought a wooden box that had been in the corner of the thatched house and placed it on the table. At this, Jean Yurin asked in a puzzled voice. What is this? It's the arrangement that person left behind. That person left it? Yes. Please open it yourself. As Chiol Surayan urged, holding out her hand, Jean Yurin hesitated for a moment before opening the lid of the wooden box with a tense expression. Click. When she opened it, there was an old wooden slip and a book inside. Jean Yurin's eyes shook as she saw the writing on the cover of the book. Tian Duan Xingming Jian Fa. Heavenly concealed luminous star sword art.